Next part in our journey of bridging from east to west, and during it I'd like to sort of traverse various topics and themes from east to west, and during it I'd like to be drawing some comparisons and highlighting significant figures and ideas across different centuries and different cultures as well. The first part, I'd like to look at some of the ancient wisdom and philosophies, and beginning with some of the Eastern philosophies. So naturally, I, as a Buddhist monk, would be interested in a Buddhist timeline of sorts. Let's take a quick look at some of the main things that have happened. But this is a timeline, so it really will be dealing mainly with, events. So in the middle of our timeline, we would be starting around 12th century. So now we're in 2024, and this really started back in minus 550-ish as a rough guide. So that's, on the timeline, we would have to go quite a bit far back. Today's Thailand, you'll see a great deal of Buddhism. You'll see thousands of temples and millions of monks and nuns. So this is a kind of, this is a testament to the endurability. If you go to Greece, you will not find thousands of Socratic temple wandering students, and you won't find Aristotelian followers. So there's one kind of comparison and contrast already. So here we are in 1238 with the Thai kingdom of Sukhothai, with Theravada as the state religion. Let's move back in time a little bit. We won't spend an inordinate amount of time on Buddhism only. 1236, bhikkhus from India arrive in Sri Lanka to revive the Theravada ordination line after it was destroyed by Muslim invaders. The school of Zen goes from China to Japan as a Soto sect. I'm not going to read all of these out. The Great Buddhist Educational Center at Nalanda, 1200, that was founded there. Or, I'm not sure, actually, it might have been destroyed. Actually, I'll better double check that. I don't want to be, because some of these, they have too much information in the blurb. So I just want to double check what we have there. This is still alive from its previous 6th century BC. Should have. I see. We'd have to. Okay, let's. Just that individual node. Get the information just on that one. Here we go. So the various subjects were taught, such as Buddhism, logic, philosophy, law, medicine, grammar, yoga, mathematics, alchemy, and astrology, is sacked, looted, and burnt by Muhammad bin Bakhtiyar Khilji. Very interesting to see about the nature of that university. Obviously, this is a terrible travesty of violent terrorism. That's not our issue at the moment. So I want to go back to the Buddhist timeline. Oh, here it is. And continue there. And we're seeing the progression backwards, if you like, away from the from the enlightenment of the Buddha 2,500 years ago at 550 BC. King Situ II of Pagan realigns Burmese Buddhism with the Mahavihara school of Ceylon. So there's a strong connection between Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia. The temple that I originally ordained in Chiang Mai, Thailand, in the 80s was strongly linked with the Lanka Vihara, and my ordination in 2010 as a Samanera was at the Sri Lankan Vihara in Brickfields, the capital of Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. So very interesting to take a look down there. Let's just whiz right down the very beginning. Let's go way back and see what we have. So in 403, Huan Yuan argues that Buddhist monks should be exempt from bowing to the emperor. Excellent. At the request of Yao Qing, so in the year 402 AD, Kumārajīva travels to Chang'an and translates many Buddhist texts into, presumably, Chinese. Oops, get off here, get off. Well, here we go. There we go. The 5th century, the kingdom of Funan begins to advocate Buddhism. So the details about the spread. This is a very important part. So, yeah, around about 400 AD, Fa-Hsien travels from China to India. And that's no mean feat. We take it so for granted. But there are documentaries that are worth watching on this journey, that many monks died on the route of starvation and freezing conditions across mountains and deserts. It's an enormous distance to travel. And then you've got languages, and you've got robbers and thieves. It's terrible. So Faxian's descriptions and writings are often used nowadays, from what I've seen, frequently. His descriptions of the cities and all the key, major sites are very interesting reading. They're very descriptive and precise. So the year 320, the university at Nalanda grows to support 3,000 to 10,000 monks. So again, and there we are about 800 years after the Buddha, after he'd died. And when we compare to, say, Socrates, Plato, or Aristotle, or Thales, or any of the people from during that time, and there's many, we don't see this. So there we see the wisdom and the skill of the Buddha in establishing an order that will self-maintain after his death. So there were, for example, other sects, if we want to use that word, such as the Jains at the time of the Buddha, who immediately upon the death of the master, the founder, go into enormous discord and schism and quarreling and power squabbles and so on. And actually, Jainism lasts till this day, but he was clearly very aware of that and preempted it through the skill in his teaching style and his lifestyle and his manner as well. So it's be nice to go a little bit more into detail in some of these. I do appreciate that many of these are not complete little nuggets. They end in a ... so they take a little bit of going into to read. So that's the year 67. Buddhism comes to China with the two monks, Kashyapa and Dharmaraksha. Interesting. Liu Ying's sponsorship of Buddhism is the first documented case of Buddhist practices in China. Still there, no shortage of temples, and even though they're now in a time of, would you stop doing that? It's a bit hard with a trackpad to do this action necessary. So, all right, let's. I wanted to go all the way back, but it's too frustrating to not be going into detail into some of more of these. Alexander the Great. So he's Greek. Yeah, so the reaches northwest India, so kind of Afghanistan and the Black Sea area above there, which was where King Menander was, who was recorded as discussing and debating with a Buddhist monk who was reputed to be fully enlightened. Menander or Melinda. So it's actually on this timeline. So 165 BCE, before Christian era. So I find this a fascinating read. I've read this many times. The questions and debates of King Menander or King Melinda, it's often written now. The questions of King Melinda, the debates of King Melinda. There's many different translations of the title, Menander Panha. So we're talking about 165 years before Christ, ish. The reign of the Indo-Greek King Menander I, who converts to Buddhism under the sage Nagasena. So that whole area, Afghanistan, and around that area, which is, well, above Afghanistan, I think it's Iran, just south east of the Black Sea, that was a Bactrian Greek kingdom there. And there was a lot of transportation and translation of Buddhism along the Silk Road during that time. So 180 BCE, Demetrius I of Bactria invades India as far as Pataliputra and establishes the Indo-Greek kingdom. So that's when we get a lot of our east-west best sort of comparisons and contrast and compare. Sorry, it's quite easy to. It's like trying to learn to fly a UFO. Doing this, you have to often turn left when you mean to turn right, and turn right. Go to the right side when you want to go left. These are kind of weird mirror controls. Third Buddhist Council, convened by King Asoka to get it all together, let it not fade away. And you see, very in with the kings, very in with the rulers, unlike, say, Socrates, and unlike Jesus Christ, where there was a great antagonism, and because what he was doing, those two were doing, were seen to be stirring up, discontentment and being troublesome, whereas the Buddhism was seen as very harmonious. So there we got the beginning of our timeline, birth of the Siddhartha. He quotes actually previous Buddhas, many, many more. I think it's 28 previous Buddhas, or is it 27, including 27, and then he's a 28, that go way, way back in time, off into that black space behind there. It's a great many of previous Buddhas that he describes as having seen through his telepathic insight into deep time. So it's not the only thing going on in that area. For example, there were other Chinese philosophies such as Lao Tzu, Confucius, and Mohism. There were other things going on in Japan. There were other things going on in that whole region, in Malaysia and up into the Southeast Asia. We can see some of these here. These are various kinds of named make sure I've just got the right one. Here it is, yeah. Displayed here. Let's go in. So Buddhism came into a pre-existing scene that had quite a lot already going on in its own style of spiritism, of animism, of philosophy, of theories, of eternal gods and spirits and realms and social advice and folklore and customs and so on. So it's integratable into most of those. And that's the same in Tibet, which was actually a very conquering, warring state previous to Buddhism. It was very much a militant state previously, I read and understood. But everywhere it's gone, previously there was quite a lot of views already existent, like say pantheistic, animistic, or they had their theisms, and they're also ruling, priests, sects with their rituals, and rulers and their queens and consorts who all had their own affinities. So we saw that also with Genghis Khan, who had a Buddhist princess queen, and also one of the Tibetan kings had both had consorts and queens from different religions, a Buddhist and a Bon queen. So it's interesting to see how it fits in and how they view Buddhism with an eye to the benefit of the kingdom. What advantages is it going to bring? What ideas and values is it increasing in the people? And what effect does it have? Because you can also see that over a long period of time. It's not a kind of new idea. It's been tried and trusted over hundreds of thousands of years. All right, so let's see. So Confucius, Laozi, Buddhism, different styles and emphases, but the teaching includes a great many different things in Buddhism. So the Pali Canon, for example, that's a compendium that is in Sri Lanka. It started to be actually textualized rather than verbally transmitted. The technology for printing and paper was yet to come. Previous to that, it was the oral recitation where they would have three monks would simultaneously recite from rote memory, and then when one of them would falter or differ, they would stop, reverse, and repeat, and iron out the distinction. So this method of artificial intelligence, of memorization and storage through human brain, memorization and groups dispersed over many different areas, was extremely effective in keeping these large bodies of information intact. Again, we can compare this with what happened in Palestine and the Middle East, in Alexandria, in all across the Greek areas, where Socrates, for example, had no recording of his ideas. It was simply done on the fly, simply done in peripatetic wandering fashion, and left up to people who happened to overhear what was going on to record and repeat it later on, anecdotally. So that's not a very efficient, effective method. And it wasn't particularly taking the future of his ideas that seriously. So we can make a kind of comparison, whereas the Buddha was very aware of this characteristic of needing to keep the teachings alive well into the future. So down here we have the Digha Nikaya. A Nikaya is a collection. This is a collection of the longest accounts, the longest stories is not quite the right word. Majjhima Nikaya, the middle length stories. Samyutta Nikaya, shorter and collected versions. And then we have various other ones. There should be a Kudika as well, which is the shorter and easy to read stories, little pithy. Here we go, Kudika Nikaya, which are they're the Netflix of their time. There's a lot of sort of wandering in the desert, novel-like stories, like novels, little novellas. And there are stories of poison porridge plots and monsters and entertainment. Where so some of them are like this entertainment. Some of them, like the Abhidhamma, are more to do with a compendium of mental characteristics, more like a psychological index. A lot of people take offense to this, believing that it was a later edition. Some of it is, and some of it isn't. Some of it was contemporary, a little part of it, which is now part of the Digha Nikaya. Let's not get into it. The Vinaya was enormously important for what we're discussing, which is the conduct of all the followers. How are they going to behave? We have accounts of some of the Greeks, such as Pythagoras. He had an actual bit of a following. He's often described as a cult leader, mixing mathematics, music, and mysticism, and astrology, and even gems, and so on. But the Vinaya is a code of discipline. This helps with the maintenance of the respectability, having a common code that's agreed to. That's how we can have this sort of 10,000, 3,000 monks and know that things are going to be orderly. And Guttari Nikaya. Similarly, as all these list on the left and right hand side, these are ordered by the numbers of them, nothing to do with the content or the topics. Just there's 26, there's 25, there's 24, there's 23, there's 21, there's 20, 90, and so on. That's much like the Anguttara Nikaya. When there was seven of something described, all those stories with seven in. I wish they would change the design of the way you can contract and expand this. Where was I? The Anguttara Nikaya, which is... Anguttara means numbered, so it's a collection of numbered things. When the Buddha said there were seven this, on another occasion he said, don't do these seven things, and over there were seven elephants who all such and such, or there were seven rules which apply. So all of those sevens are collected together in the Book of Sevens. And then similarly for the Book of Eights and the Nines and the Tens and the Elevens, up to 11, I think it is. So that's the Pali Canon, and that's how we got such a longevity in the teachings. I won't go into it too much more, but that's a little bit about the way the Buddha's teachings concur and differ, contrast and compare with people such as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. SPA, S-P-A, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. They're in that order. Socrates, elder mentor, Plato, and then Aristotle. And Plato also saw his teacher barbarically treated by the democratic mob who put him to a court and therefore death. And therefore he went for an idea of a republic ruled by philosophers. An idea which is actually very similar to what actually manifested in the Buddha's time. He just did it a different way. He didn't write a book on statescraft, but actually what you did see was that from halfway through his life onwards, he's advising all of the kings of the kingdom, of the continent. The majority of the kings would go to consult him, and he would give them very succinct, memorable compendium ideas in story form and in compendium form about how to rule. So effectively, he was, by proxy, heavily influencing the kings as they ruled their empires, and also their queens as well. Many of them became advocates of his values scale and system. So so Confucius, Laozi, Buddhism. Confucius, nothing mystical and no realms and no afterlife and no reincarnation and no meditation particularly, just simply following rules to do with roles, what you should do to whom, how you should behave, how a wife should behave to her husband, and so on. You get a mini version of that kind of thing in Buddhism called the Sigala Ovada. It's the sort of commonly called the layperson's code of conduct, but not much, not too much anyway. You get precepts, you get the 5 precepts in Buddhism, which are to do with not killing, not stealing. But these are also undertaken, they're not commandments as well. That's a very important thing to understand about that. 5 precepts. That I undertake not to kill, I undertake not to steal, I undertake not to abuse sensuality in the form of illegitimate affairs or paedophilia, bestiality, or so on. And then speech, not to use lying, and not to use harsh and slander, harsh words, and gossip and nonsense talking, excessively frivolous use of speech. So contrast there between Confucius's approach, which is imposing this sort of order that you should do this, you should be this, you should say that, you should walk like this, do like that, and do this to these other people. And then Laozi, which is very much more nature harmonizing. It's a much more mystical approach to nature. Go with the flow and be like the bamboo, be like the wind, be like the river, be like the ocean, be like nature, and you will therefore not suffer from being a human, all the human neurotic things. These 3 big influences across Asia, excepting from China and then extending out. So you had the influence from India and you had the influence from China. All the other places had their various forms of things that might manifest as animism or vegetarian cults or solo worship and deities and pantheistic and pantheism of various different kinds, or stupa worship and many different forms, statue worship and different things. So those philosophies shaped Eastern civilizations, therefore, and then the views on morality, governance, the nature of reality, and the role and people. So also women, gender, homosexuality, war, meat and cows, and so on. Everything was affected. Fear of death, worship of death, or thoughts about deities and the planets and astrology. So everything, and alchemy, everything came to be sort of affected. So then we move on to compare what was going on with the ancient wisdom in those areas. Let's have a little bit of a look at Greek culture and the many ancient Greek schools of philosophy, which are both, they're worth familiarizing yourself with them over and again, with the names and with the key characters and their ideas. So this one mainly is about the names of the schools, this orbit here. So it shows you also the sheer extent of them. Seneca, still talked about today. Cicero, peripatetic schools. Seneca, I've got a friend in Canada who still quotes Seneca today. So that shows you the extent of the influence of someone who was alive, much like Marcus Aurelius. He also quotes wisdom from Marcus Aurelius, a stoic and very wise, restrained, lonely emperor who felt enormous burden of responsibility to be morally well behaved, unlike many of the other leaders, emperors, and even philosophers. Down the bottom there, I see Diogenes. So Diogenes was, I heard one YouTuber describing him as a troll of epic proportions. He would be attending magistrates' courts and noisily eating. He would be masturbating in public. He would be walking naked. He would be sleeping out on the streets. He was rude. He was provocative. He was a kind of anarchic punk rocker of his time, trying to sort of shock, as opposed to someone like, say, like some of the other people around who were very well restrained. So again, the effect that these behaviors have, people like to look at someone like that and what happens to them, and do they end up actually happy or what, and how does society react to their ideas. So as you can see, a great many schools, a great many islands, mainly focused on Athens, on Athena, the focus at the time. Not all of them actually came from that area. Thales came from Miletus and then travelled down. So the relationship between Athens and Rome, very important. But that whole area looks out onto the ocean, and so it's also very important for trade and for communication and sharing of ideas. Diogenes up there here, just going through Diogenes. I think people exaggerate his hedonism from what I've heard. He was actually recommending something a bit more like a middle way, if we're looking for comparisons and parallels between Eastern and Western. He was very much talking about a wise use of happy pleasure, not a really stoic and very hard. There's a lot of those ideas of the very conservative and very disciplined, self-restrained ideas, I think were consciously also used, knowing that the armies would hear them and employ them. So there were also this realization that having a restrained ruling army works, as opposed to a rampant, barbaric, raping and pillaging one, which would only be very short-lived. Parmenides. So a lot of these people had also theories brought forward theories of the universe, whether it was atomism or it was that the world is made from water originally, and everything eventually turns into water, and eventually, water will always evaporate and turn back into the ocean. And the ideas like this, where everything is elementary fire, from the fire element originally, and then turns into its forms and then back again. So a lot of metaphysical speculation and exploration of what's the universe and way it works, which brings us to a very important point, which is starting points, which is common questions in philosophy. which I'd like to take a look at. So here we go. This on the right hand side, I'm just going to go to this common questions. I started making a note of these when I was going through accounts of philosophy, and you start to hear them often just thrown in. But I think it's very important to acknowledge these. The starting point, like why are we even thinking about these people, or why are we even looking into these ideas, which is, what was the starting point? Why, where did they get to this idea of what did he say, that the whole of reality starts from water? How did that come from? So often it's these questions like, what is reality, and what things exist and don't exist? Is there a self, or is there a God? Is there a soul? Are there entities, invisible entities? Or how do you know that chair, does it exist or does it not? How does the world work? Why are we here? So those things. Epistemology, which looks at the what do you base your beliefs on? So when you actually say, no, God exists, how do you know? What can you prove? How do you know? What made you believe that? Also, I saw a ghost. Well, how do you know it was a ghost? How do you know that they exist? Based on what? Is it belief? Is it imagination? Is it report from a teacher? Is it, so on and on. These questions are very important, and also they contrast, another way of comparing and contrasting with, there are other ones in it, by the way, it's not just those, with the Buddha's advice and approach to the business of questioning. He didn't just leave people to sort of go, I don't know, think what you want, ask what you want. He gave clear advice on which questions to ask and which not to. So there are a whole bunch of questions which are unanswerable, and there are also questions which involve the self. So these are called, so there are 16 questions. The Buddha said they have attachment to self. They assume a self before you ask the question. So, like a question is like, am I good enough? That assumes you have a self. The thing that is good enough is assumed to exist. So there's a bit of an Englishism there, like oldie English. Whence came this person? Whither will you go? Rather quaint Shakespearean English. Having been what, shall I become what in the future? It's like, I used to be a taxi driver, but what shall I be now? There's no taxis, there's Uber. What shall I be in the future? What's going to happen after me after I die? Or what will I be when I'm older? Will I be a policeman? Will I be a father? Will I be ugly? Am I going to be a cripple? These questions. This use of the mind is also a very big part of what the Buddha was mainly focused on: suffering and the causes of suffering. Buddha was very keen to reveal to people that the way that you think can create enormous suffering or enormous bliss. The way you direct your mind, the aim, the word that they used was sankappa. So there's two parts in this. View, actually, like, what is the self or not, and what is the world, and what is time, and what is important in those senses, and what you cling to about that. And in terms of beliefs, like, I'm a Scorpio, I am a chauvinist, I am a Scottish, I am a French, I am a a such guy, I'm a Nazi, whatever the people are clinging to in that sense, that then goes on and affects suffering. Or, if you watch an episode of Seinfeld and watch George, the neurotic little guy from New York, he's all like, I'm a failure. Why do people think that about me? It's not the real me. The real me is like this, and that's me. This all caught up in this cobweb of concepts here. So let's go up a bit and look at a bit more. These ones are this is just one example as well of these kind of things. What was I in the past? Did I not exist in the past? Wasn't I a guitarist? Wasn't I a smoker? What am I now? Am I not? Am I for real? Am I doomed? Am I failure? Am I inadequate? How am I? Am I good? Am I bad? What do you think? Am I? So people can get caught up in these questions generated from their own mind. You can put a deck chair in front of them. You can put them a yellow car in front of them. It doesn't matter. They will start going into these out of habit and out of unawareness. So lacking mindfulness, people can get spun up in this. Oh, I'm an American. Hey, I'm an Australian. Hey, I'm a this. I'm a that. I'm an activist. I'm a communist. I'm a Marxist. I'm a la 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 la. I'm fat. I'm thin. I'm gay. I'm lesbian. I'm not. I'm married. I'm all of these go around and round and round, bouncing and spinning and churning up causes of suffering. So that's one kind of these. The way that might pan out. Questions, there are also unanswerable questions that often, they call the 10 indeterminate questions. Simply the Buddha said, you're not going to get to the end of these questions. Leave it alone. Just forget it, just put it aside. Don't get into it. Whereas precisely that is what many of these other schools did do. They got into it. They built their entire school based on these. Sorry, you seem to have gone into grindy mode again. It's like slowed right down. I think it's to do with the internet. We're supposed to have 5G. So I thought we'd fixed it yesterday, but it seems to have gone back into slow-mo, unfortunately. It was going nicely early on. Never mind. Let's look at these 10 indeterminate questions. They seem to be quite far away. They are right down there. Here we go. So this one, these two here. The world is eternal. Or you can substitute the word universe or reality. It works the same way. The loka view. The world is not eternal. So it will come to an end. There will be doom. There will be the end of the days and that sort of thing. Or the world is eternal, so it doesn't really matter. You just go on and on and on forever. There will be no end of it, which is actually a view of, and there are very many versions of that. We had Nietzsche became, I think, very depressed on account of that idea. He had this idea of an eternal return, that you just have the same life over and over and over and over again. I think it's the same idea behind Groundhog Day, where the same world keeps coming back, but in Groundhog Day it resolves. It ends, and he ends up kind of escaping from the eternal return. But Nietzsche's idea was it just keeps coming back exactly the same, no matter what you do. So it doesn't matter what you do. So this is also why the Buddha said such ideas are extremely dangerous, because not only you will not make any effort to change things, but he pointed out that the world works by cause and effect and by the way that you behave internally and externally. These two views, that the self or the soul is identical with the body, that's materialistic view, that the body dies and that's it, end of show. It's just like throwing a television on the junk heap. That was it. it only lasted for that long. It lasted for 45 years, or it lasted for 69 years. That was it. There's no consequence, or there's nothing else that happens afterwards as a result. So then people can become very nihilistic. They can murder other people thinking that there's no consequence coming. So, or that the soul is not identical with the body, it's this other thing, but there is this other self-soul that is kind of like this candle flame that's not the candle, that they're two very, very, formed things. So based on this can also cause a lot of quarrelling and getting into what that means over and over and over and over. That's a form of a view that the world is not, we're not talking about eternity this time, which is to do with time. Eternity is about time. That it's infinite, spatially infinite, like this app. This app has basically sort of infinite space, doesn't it? It goes off and off, perspective, and you could scroll and scroll it, you'd never come to the end of that. You wouldn't come to the edge and go, it's the end of it's the edge of the app. It goes on. That is some people's view, that the world is like that it's infinite in every direction. And then there's other people say it's not, like the Flat Earth Society, it's got edges, that the universe, you get to the end of it and it's not anymore the universe, there's something else, or not. So, and again, these are not that the Buddha was saying this is right and that's wrong. It's precisely what he wasn't doing. He was saying, see these two questions, don't get into it. See these two questions, they never resolve. And when someone would say, yes, but what's your point? He said, I'm just going to put that question aside. So that's more about, not about quarrelling the truth, it's about wisdom. The wisdom of putting it aside, because you're not going to agree. Even if I have proof, well, then, you're still going to go, no, I don't believe it. And then this one was, a lot of people wanted to know, does the Buddha exist after he dies? Or, so you're not answering, that means he doesn't exist after death. And what about, the Tathagata is a epithet for the Buddha, meaning thus gone, or he's well gone beyond reality, is not subject to space and time and ego and existence and desires and everything. That's something about, captures the gist of it. So there are views that on the one hand, that the Buddha, the Tathagata, does not exist after death, which is kind of like materialistic. And then there's the view that the Tathagata neither exists nor does not exist after death. So they're trying to pin down this sort of, an answer about that. And then the view, I can't see these, they got a little bit jumbled up. The view that the Tathagata both exists and does not exist after death, kind of covering all bases. And then the view the Tathagata exists after death. So that's a kind of like Jesus in heaven idea that, there's quite a few versions in Buddhism where they have the Buddha ascending up into the heavens and existing there eternally. Many of them will. But I say the Buddha did not commit on this. He said, no, I'm just going to put the question aside. I'm not going to put the answer aside. I'm going to put the question aside. So these are called in the indeterminate questions. Is it finite? Is it eternal? Do you exist after death? Not me, the Buddha. Let us know what goes on with you. So is the soul and the self identical with the body or not? So putting it aside. So that's very interesting use of questions and views. So this part, views and aims. These are two factors of the Eightfold Path, very importantly. Two factors of the Eightfold Path, called the wisdom section. So you have to get the views clarified, you have to get the aims clarified. If you're meditating to, just lose weight so that I'm really beautiful, you're not going to get the aim of Buddhism right. So the view there would be, I am my body, and beauty is a slim waist, so on. That's what needs to be sorted out, and it's part of the clearing the path towards nibbana. All right, so there's those views there that lead to those questions, the indeterminate ones, and there's the views relating to a self. It's very important stuff in terms of attaining happiness. That's the main point of all that there. Okay, so I think we'll call it a day there for this recording and this little tour of the dome, the what do you call this? The realms. Many more journeys to go through in our sort of UFO here, to take a look. And thank you very much for following through, and keep up with many more. Please leave your comments and any questions or observations in the comments section. I'm very happy to respond and get your feedback as and when you can. So good luck with getting more familiar with these journeys between East and West, and creating this bridge between worlds and meanings and understandings. All right. May many beings be free from avoidable suffering. Take care.